Good evening, everyone. Wow, look at you, completely packed house. Unbelievable. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the Distinguished Lecture on Brain, Learning, and Memory. Now, today marks 31 years since we started doing this. 31 years. How many of you have been coming to these things for 31 years? I see a few, look, not trying to age anyone, but thank you. Thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause. It really is such a special thing that we can do. And in 1995, when our founding director, Dr. James L. McGaugh, who unfortunately could not be with us here today, he had a conflict, but he sends his regards. And he started this lecture series in 1995 with a singular vision that remains the ethos to this day of this lecture series. The goal, even in 1995, remains to this day incredibly simple: to share science with our community and to create opportunities for dialogues about brain research. So who here is interested in brain? You betcha. Who's not interested in brain? You're in the wrong room, because we have a room full of brainiacs. And I'm astounded every year that we hold these events, and I look out on this incredible auditorium. And how about this venue, by the way, the Irvine Barclay Theater, who have been our partners and our supporters for over 30 years, and we are so thankful that they're able to let us use this incredible space for public education. But really, you're the heroes of this story. Just think about it for a second. You could be doing anything else with your time tonight. This is a Wednesday night. You could be home watching The Price is Right on CBS. I realize the young people in the audience did not understand a word I said. So The Price is Right is a game show that your parents and grandparents watch. CBS is network TV. TV is this thing that we used to have before Netflix. Rectangular thing, yeah. You know, you never know. The world is moving so fast. But you guys are here consistently, and you're showing up to these things telling me that you're interested in hearing more, in having these dialogues with us, and I thank you for that. Now, for a serious thought for a moment here, the topic that we're going to talk about today is incredibly important. Women's brain health is one of the most underfunded and understudied issues of our time. And we have an opportunity to change that, and you guys have the opportunity. So I want you all to make me a promise while you're here today. I want you to promise that if you learn something here today that changes the way that you think, or gives you language to talk about this in a different way, that you will go out there and tell at least 5 people about it. Not 1, not 2, 5. It could be a friend, a relative, a family member, a colleague, a neighbor, your group chat, someone on this street. It doesn't matter. I don't care, as long as it's 5 or more people. That's your mission. That's your ambassadorship. Because this changes only when people who now have the language and have the knowledge are able to speak it out loud. And that's what today is all about. Which brings me to the reason why this room is so packed. Certainly not for me. It is for our distinguished speaker, who I'm delighted to introduce you to. She is a professor of neuroscience at the University of California, Santa Barbara, a distinguished fellow of our center here at UC Irvine, the Center for the Neurobiology of Learning and Memory, and the director of the Ann Bowers Women's Brain Health Initiative. Now, she is a world-class scientist and a leading voice in studying the female brain across the lifespan. Her research uses brain imaging, endocrine measures, and a whole host of other tools to be able to understand how hormone biology shapes brain structure and function in this enduring way. And she's worked on this problem all the way from adolescence, through pregnancy, through menopause, and beyond. So truly the world's expert on these topics. Now, her work has been recognized with major honors, including, this is just a snippet because it is way too long a list, being named the National Academy of Sciences Frontiers of Science Kavli Fellow, a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Health and Society Scholar, an NIH Women's Health Scholar, a Hellman Fellow, among many, many other honors and awards. Now, it's one thing to be a rigorous scientist, and that 100% she is. But it's a whole other thing to use that platform for public education and advocacy for the things that truly matter. And one of the incredible things about our speaker is that she has held national and international leadership roles to really change the narrative about women's health and women's brain health. She serves on steering groups and coalitions that are actively shaping the research agenda when it comes to women's health. That includes the Women's Brain Health Coalition, the Milken Institute's Women's Health Network, and the Women's Health Access Matters Research Collaborative. I am proud to not only introduce her as a phenomenal researcher, colleague, collaborator, public educator, mentor, role model, but most of all, I am delighted to call her my good friend. With that, please help me welcome the one and only Dr. Emily Jacobs.
Everybody. Am I on? Can you hear me okay? It is truly an absolute honor to be here tonight with you all. I have so many thanks to give. I promise I'll keep it short, but really just a shout out to Mike and Manuela for leading tonight's effort, for leading the CNLM, and as Mike said, to all of you for showing up on a Wednesday night to get educated about women's brain health. So you've already won in my book. So let's get started. I'm gonna do things a little bit differently. It's 7:30, we're kind of getting cozy. So I'm gonna kick things off with a short film, it's very brief, that I think just sets the stage for why we're all here, certainly why I'm here. So take a look.
Let's start with some good news. Neuroscience is having a moment. We are learning more about our brains than ever before. Over 50,000 neuroimaging articles have been published since 1995, shedding light on the most complex organ in the human body. Of those 50,000 articles, about half of the test subjects are women, and yet only half of 1% center on matters specific to women's bodies. Wait, that can't be right. Half of 1%? Guess that brings us to the bad news. Half of 1% is so damn small. It's this small and this little. If you made a pie chart, let's say boysenberry, half of 1% is that. There. That's the entirety of what we know about brain health and the fork crumbs.
Here's a list of things we know more about than the female brain.
The ocean floor, male pattern baldness,
Dinos.
Erectile dysfunction. How to make erectile dysfunction medicine chewable and yummy. Artificial sheep uteruses. LeBron James's off-season diet.
Outer space.
Outer space. Meaning if men really were from Mars and women were actually from Venus, we might know more about menopause by now. Even in cases like Alzheimer's, which mostly affects women, preclinical research relies on male models. The assumption is if it works for men, it works. And that doesn't work. The most recently approved Alzheimer's drug shows positive effects primarily in men. One size fits all is actually one size fits half. And in this case, it's the wrong half. When 99.5% of all neuroscience research excludes matters of women's health, mysterious things stay that way.
Why do women get Alzheimer's more often than men?
Is my birth control making me depressed?
Are concussions different in girls?
Why can't I remember anyone's name anymore?
Why am I so sleepy,
Sad.
hungry?
Am I undercaffeinated or is this
A menopause thing?
Jury is still out because nobody bothered to put any women on the jury. The male body has been the standard since always. Lab rats, male. Clinical test subjects, men. The tenured neuroscience faculty, 80% tweed elbow patches. But what if, maybe, what if we set fire to the status quo? Demand better, broader data.
Study women.
Thousands of them. We start a revolution in neuroscience. Or join those who already have.
So I want to begin by putting this moment tonight in a historical context. As a society, we have underinvested in women's health research since basically the time record-keeping began. And to understand why, I want us to consider the intersection between gender equity in the sciences and the status of women's health, not as parallel phenomenon, but as deeply connected ones. So we're going to follow in the great Shakespearean tradition of having a story in 5 acts. Act 1, mind the gap. Okay, so let's begin with what brought us out tonight, right? This incredible 3-pound mass of tissue. And if I'm being totally honest, the human brain looks pretty unremarkable. My daughter calls it like a big gelatinous walnut. But at the microscopic level, it contains multitudes, over 85 billion neurons that are wired together into precise circuits. And these neural circuits are responsible for an incredible repertoire of complex behaviors. Think about it. That is capable of writing an opera. It can invent tools that allow us to see into the deepest corners of space. And even more profoundly, the human brain can invent tools to see and study itself. When President Obama launched the Human Brain Initiative in 2013, he said that understanding how the brain works is the greatest scientific challenge of our time. Right? It's the moonshot of our generation. And around the world, we have neuroscientists trying to crack the neural code and to understand how the brain gives rise to the mind, or to identify therapeutic solutions to devastating disorders like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and depression. And if we have any hope of meeting these challenges, we need the best minds at the table and in the lab, inventing radically new ways of seeing, probing, and understanding the brain. And that's what I want to talk about in Act 1. So here's a famous photograph taken at the Solvay conference in Belgium in 1927. The photo shows 29 attendees, including scientific luminaries like Einstein, Schrödinger, and Heisenberg. When I first saw this photo, I was struck by 2 conflicting sentiments. First, it's pretty astonishing that such an assembly of brilliant scientists could be gathered together, right, in an intimate meeting of the minds. But second, I was disheartened at the people that are implicitly missing. Right, what do you see when you look at this photograph? Yeah, so of the 29 attendees, 28 were men of European origin. Only the famed Marie Curie broke precedent. And although the 29 attendees compiled an incredible list of scientific breakthroughs, one can only imagine how much more would have been accomplished had women and ethnic minorities been allowed greater access to their ranks. Or as Stephen Jay Gould once wrote, I'm somehow less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops. Now today, most science departments are more diverse than the photograph from the Solvay conference, but not by much, right? And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the history of explicit forces that have kept women and minorities out of higher education. That history is well known. But what may be less known, I think, are the implicit biases that impede girls' access to STEM from the very beginning. Let's just take one example to illustrate the quiet forces at play. So here's a study published by Matrescence in 2012. Researchers sent fake resumes to real science professors at research universities around the country, much like here at UC Irvine. Now, these resumes were identical, except for one word at the top of the page. The first name of the applicant was randomly assigned to be male or female. And what do you think happened, right? So these faculty were asked to judge the candidates based on their competence, their hireability, and their deservedness of mentoring, and then they were asked to come up with a starting salary. What we found is that the male applicant was judged to be more competent, more hireable, more deserving of mentoring, and was offered $4,000 on average more than the female candidate. Now look, these gender biases are not the result of a few individuals with antiquated attitudes. These are the result of widely held implicit beliefs. And here's the crux of the problem. Advocating for diversity in science isn't just a matter of social justice. Diversity in science makes science better. It's as simple as that. It drives innovation, it challenges the status quo, and it changes the very nature of the questions we think to ask. Or as Sadiq Parikh writes, the reason for diversity transcends the moral imperative. This is about inventing technologies that will grow the economy and bring medicines to fruition faster. In other words, the absence of women from science isn't just about the cost to women, it's about the cost to the world. Here's one example. Biomedical research relies on animal models all the time, right, to understand diseases, to test new therapeutic targets, to advance knowledge of basic biology. But what the public may not realize is that this research is conducted almost exclusively in males. Now, that discovery was made by Annalise Beery and a team of scholars in 2011. They found that the over-reliance on male animals is evident throughout the biomedical sciences, right, from neuroscience to immunology to pharmacology to cancer biology. And it has been true for half a century. It's even true in animal models of human disorders that are more prevalent in women, like Alzheimer's, depression, and anxiety. This bias has compromised the health and safety of women in ways we are just beginning to understand. Right? By some estimates, about 80% of the drugs and medical devices that are pulled from the market each year are done so because of adverse effects in women. Effects that might have been caught had that early preclinical testing been carried out in both sexes. Here's some good news. Beery's discovery started a movement. And by 2016, the NIH, with leadership from Janine Clayton, who's at the Office of Research on Women's Health, still is to this day, knock on wood, she rolled out a series of mandates to ensure that future animal studies had to be balanced by sex. And this is a big step towards ensuring that men and women will benefit from our research efforts. And it's not lost on me that women played a critical role in this paradigm shift. Right? Beery saw something that nobody else saw. Clayton used her position of power to push for change, and together they changed a convention that had been passed on for decades. Now, none of these are new problems. As the British historian Eleanor Cleghorn writes, our bodies are not elusive to us, but something about our body seems to thwart and frustrate medicine at every turn, and our lives depend on medicine learning to listen. But we're not listening. So to put real numbers on the problem, let's consider a second example from neuroscience. So when MRI technology entered the mainstream in the 90s, it gave scientists the ability to visualize the living human brain in exquisite detail. Right? We now have a way to better understand how the brain works when it's healthy or what goes wrong when it's not. Since the early 1990s, over 50,000 neuroimaging articles of the human brain have been published, right, represented by this blue wave. And then if you squint really hard, you might be able to detect this thin black line at the bottom. That is everything we know about how the brain responds to pregnancy, menopause, the menstrual cycle, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, and so much more, as you learned from the video. Right? That's the data, the fork crumbs. Altogether, studies on female-specific experiences amount to less than 0.5% of the total brain imaging literature. So when we talk about the scientific body of knowledge, let's consider whose body does it serve? Menarche, pregnancy, menopause, these are health inflection points, right? They deserve our attention, but we're not paying attention. Women are 51% of the population, but less than 10% of NIH funding goes to conditions that predominantly affect women. And I just want to remind folks in this room that it took a literal act of Congress to require the enrollment of women into clinical trials. And does anybody know what year marked the first White House conference on women's health research? Any guesses? 2024. So it has become clear to so many of us in this room that advancing women's health is going to require a global shift in science culture. And we are paying a steep price for our collective ignorance, right? We don't get this for free. World Economic Forum issued a report last year suggesting that closing the women's health gender gap would unleash a $1 trillion return on investment every single year. So whether you're driven by moral urgency or by cold, hard economic reality, investing in women's health is the way forward, right? So here's the ultimate case for diversity. Scientists cannot answer questions they don't see. So for a field like neuroscience, it's like the menstrual cycle or matrescence or menopause were never visible. Right? Just like studying male mice didn't seem strange until some folks came along and challenged those ingrained assumptions. So for the students and the educators in the audience, I implore you to ask, what are all the other questions we can't see because we lack the experience to even imagine them? Right? We need scientists and physicians whose vision is not blurred by the lack of experience. So let's move into Act 2, the menstrual cycle. In Acts 2 and 3 and 4, I want to convince you that some of the topics that neuroscience has systemically overlooked are in fact deeply important for understanding the brain. And to understand why, I want us to consider two features of biology. So first, the brain is an endocrine organ, right? It is responsive to hormones that are produced in peripheral endocrine glands, like the ovaries and the testes, like the thyroid, the adrenals. And these hormones travel through your circulatory system, right? They use your blood as their superhighway. They go everywhere your blood goes, and then they bind to targets or receptors in different tissues, including the brain, right? The brain is replete with hormones, and the hormones I'm interested in are called sex hormones or gonadal hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. The brain also directs the release of these hormones, so it's bidirectional. Lesson number 2, if you pretend we're in like a baby neuroendo class, is another feature of the mammalian endocrine system is that hormone secretion varies over time, right? There are ebbs and flows. We have circadian cycles that occur on a 24-hour time scale. We have menstrual cycles over several days in mice or several weeks in humans. And in some species, we actually have circannual cycles, right? These are cycles that span the seasons. Here's just a cartoon depiction of some of the major endocrine transitions that can occur over the lifespan, right? From the pubertal increase in ovarian hormone production to menstrual cycles happening to pregnancy and menopause. And what scientists are now realizing is that these endocrine transitions are in fact health transitions. Right? They, just as one example, something about these kind of critical periods seem to influence a woman's risk or resilience to depression. We know that, and may give us insight into biological pathways that help us understand why 70% of Alzheimer's cases are women. So, what do we know about, I hope I've convinced you that it's important to study these, but what do we actually know about how these endocrine rhythms shape the brain? Well, this is some work from the 1990s from Catherine Woolley, who was collecting data, conducting field-defining work, showing that a region of the brain that I think you probably learned about if you've come to these lectures is called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is finely tuned to these endocrine rhythms. Right, so she looked at something called hippocampal dendritic spines. Right, so these spines are like little protrusions, little bumps on the cell that allow neurons to form synaptic connections to other cells. Right, so if you zoom in and you see these bumps, those are spines. And remarkably, she discovered that the density of these spines, the amount and the density of these spines, it's yoked to the mouse's menstrual cycle stage. So you can see on the left panel here, at the beginning of the cycle, when estrogen levels are low, there's sort of this sparse spine density. The day of ovulation, when estrogen levels peak, you see this mass proliferation of spines. And then just 24 hours later, when estrogen falls back down, you can see sort of the system reset. This was really science ahead of its time, and Woolley, by her own admission, was met with a great deal of skepticism. So happy to have seen her at this year's Society for Neuroscience, an organization of 30,000 of us from around the world, giving the presidential keynote lecture, because finally science has caught up to what she's known all along. I think neuroscientists said, why on earth would the hippocampus, right, this area is central to learning and memory, why would it be listening to what's happening in the ovaries in females or the testes in males? So fast forward to present day, we actually now have access. So I should have mentioned that these are camera lucida drawings. These are pictures taken from histological sections of the mouse brain. So, she's looking at a mouse and then, performing histology on it, and then looking at another mouse at a different stage of the cycle. But, technology has advanced in the last 30 years, and we have access to these really advanced imaging techniques that allow us to observe these changes in near real time. So my lab has teamed up with the Gord lab at UCSB to leverage these techniques for ultra-high resolution imaging of hippocampal neurons. So we're using something called 2-photon microscopy, and then this rendering of a microprism that's actually implanted in the skull, giving us a window into the brain. Think of it like a submarine periscope that's kind of flipped upside down, right? So this setup allows scientists to record real-time videos of the hippocampal circuit at cellular or even subcellular resolution. And so sure enough, using this technique, just as Woolley predicted using cross-sectional data or single time point data, our graduate student, Nora Wolcott, observed this pulse in the brain. So P is proestrus, it's when estrogen peaks during the time of ovulation, right? So she observes this pulse in the brain, and it's like it keeps time with the rhythmic ebb and flow of hormones. Right, so spines ebb and flow, and not in a disorganized manner, right? It's highly metronomic. It's in sync with the endocrine system. And now it brings up all these sort of philosophical questions. Why is the brain organized in this way? Why are these rhythms happening? And, for the nerds in the audience, head to our paper to find out more about its influence on the hippocampal circuit. But I want to jump to maybe what's more relevant to us. What about in humans? Can we actually see changes in the brain across the human menstrual cycle? Well, my graduate student, Laura Pritchett, had a brilliant idea, a little out there, but a brilliant idea to have the lab image her brain every 24 hours for 30 days across a complete menstrual cycle. This cracks me up. One editor later said, they're like old school NASA test pilots. They put themselves in an MRI and drew their own blood every day for 2 months. So if there's anybody from like the Human Subjects Board, that was very colorful. We did have a certified phlebotomist on staff. We were not poking ourselves. So she does this experiment, and these are her actual hormone data where, you can see in teal, there's this increase in estrogen, which spikes around the ovulatory window. And then in blue is a hormone called progesterone, which is very low the first half of the cycle and then peaks in the second half of the cycle. And so every 24 hours, literally to the minute, she gets her blood drawn, she has a brain scan. Needless to say, this had never been done before. So for many women, this ebb and flow, right, that you can see on the left-hand panel of hormones, this is kind of as steady as the tides, right? This pulse is almost like a vital sign, right? We know that these rhythmic changes drive physiological functions all around the body, but nobody really knew how it shaped the human brain. And so that's what we were looking at, right? Just like we did in mice, we looked at the hippocampus and we tracked how it changed across the human menstrual cycle. So we can, we're not doing subcellular imaging here, but we can at least look at sort of hippocampal subfields or like specific medial temporal lobe regions that make up this area. So we did this across the menstrual cycle. And then, in a little experimental twist, we reran the entire study. Everything was exactly the same, but this time the participant was on a drug that selectively suppressed progesterone levels by 97%. So notice in the right-hand graph, this hormones across the cycle, the blue peak is totally absent. Okay, so what did we find? Sure enough, right, there's particular regions of that medial temporal lobe and of the hippocampus that seem to expand when progesterone levels are elevated. And then if we clamp down on progesterone with this drug, so sort of suppressing it pharmacologically, we can abolish this effect, right? So we can see it in the rodent models, we can see it now in the human brain, these rapid changes across these sort of endocrine-mediated events. So the brain is responding to these changes, and now we can track it. Okay, Act 3, matrescence. if, you know, the endocrine changes that we know are happening across the circadian rhythm, so AM to PM, or during the menstrual cycle, like I just showed you, or represented in this top graph, you know, we can see the neurobiological effects of that. But those endocrine rhythms, just purely on sort of a standard scale, they're dwarfed by the changes that are observed during pregnancy. So what on earth is happening to the brain during pregnancy? So we had another extraordinary opportunity to team up with one of your own, Dr. Liz Crastle, who I think might be here in the audience. Liz, are you here? Where's your hand? Yeah, there's Liz. You know, we had this ability to answer this question that had never been answered before. And so in 2024, we published the first detailed map of the human brain across pregnancy. So Liz underwent brain imaging and blood draws starting pre-conception, pre-pregnancy, was followed throughout the gestational window, roughly every 2 weeks, and then up to 2 years postpartum. You can see hormone levels in panel B, right? So just this like skyrocketing of estradiol and progesterone production across the gestational window. And then you see that big cliff. That's the cliff that happens at parturition, right? That's the endocrine cliff that happens when you give birth. And then you can see sort of the types of measures that we're collecting over time. And so what did we find? On just a basic level, it is clear that the brain undergoes this highly choreographed change across gestation. And we're finally able to observe this process in real time. So here on the right, we're just mapping different tissues of the brain, from cerebrospinal fluid to gray matter to cortical thickness. And some of the lessons learned are that, you know, there's like this honing of gray matter across pregnancy. So there's a volumetric reduction in gray matter volume that's evident across the cortical mantle, so the outer surface of the brain. And we can see it unfold week by week by week across gestation, right? So this line here, or you can plot it by trimester if you want, right? Preconception, first, second, third trimester. You know, so this is really kind of like a profound effect on the human brain. Now, just like neuroscientists know happens in adolescence, right, where there's this sharp pubertal rise in sex hormones, and we know that that leads to reductions in gray matter volume and increases in white matter connections. We see the same thing with during this period, right now called matrescence, sort of in conversation with adolescence. So matrescence is this extended period of neuroplasticity in the adult human brains. Gray matter volume is being kind of honed, white matter expansion, right, over this period. So again, we're beginning to think about matrescence as this extended period of neuroplasticity in the adult human brain. I think neuroscientists didn't realize that the adult brain was capable of this level of sort of transformation, really sort of targeted, specific honing of the brain over this period of time, because we don't study women. It was sitting there all along. And I wonder, like, what are all the other nuggets of gold that are lying just under the surface of our knowledge if we just bother to look? You know, what's neat about these findings is just how clean they are, how beautiful these changes are, because these are these are just highly choreographed. We can see them with what's called precision imaging. So the kind of work that we did with Dr. Crastle, where we can image a small number of individuals with really high temporal frequency and chart these changes. We can also see it if we just image hundreds of women, which we've now are doing in collaboration with a group in Spain. And we can, again, recapitulate these same curves, right? So gray matter volume that's kind of slowly reducing from preconception to the third trimester, and then a little bit of a rebound in the postpartum period. We even have data to show that there's additional honing with subsequent pregnancies. So in gray, the gray bar shows the trajectory in first-time moms, and in blue, we can see, you know, a similar trajectory in second-time moms, maybe just a little bit less pronounced each time. There's even data from UK Biobank suggesting that if you take women even in their 40s, 50s, and 60s and do kind of fancy, machine learning on them, you can predict the number of pregnancies they've had only by looking at their brain imaging scan and nothing else. So this project has expanded rapidly, right, into an international effort that we call the Maternal Brain Project. We have experts in neuroscience, reproductive immunology, reproductive psychiatry, proteomics, AI. We've all joined forces to learn as much as humanly possible about this transformative period. Why? Because women's brain health scholars lack the most basic substrate for discovery: data, right? We do not have the data we need to predict postpartum depression before it manifests. We don't have the data that we need to understand the effects of preeclampsia on later life brain health. We need better data. And I hope it goes without saying that paying attention to this critical window could hold clues for enhancing brain health for everybody. And just a shout out to our AI team who won a Time Best Invention of the Year for their work developing a digital twin model of these brain changes across pregnancy. That was announced a couple months ago. Act 4 is menopause. During the menopausal transition, 80% of women experience neurological symptoms, right? 80%, including mood disturbances, sleep disorders, brain fog, hot flashes, which actually originate in the brain because of the brain's thermoregulatory circuits, expecting an estrogen signal and not getting it. And yet, we are just beginning to understand how the human brain adapts to this period. Right? And it's not just the scientists who are stumped. I want you to watch this clip from 2 women who you know who have access to the best doctors in the world.
It's a trip. you know, it happened to me around 52, 53, and I thought I was dying. I really did, because I did not have, did you have hot flashes?
I was able to, I started hormone therapy.
Okay, so yeah. I didn't know nothing about that.
See, and that's what we didn't know.
That's what I mean. People don't talk about it.
And here's the thing. People don't research us as women.
Right.
Why don't we know all about this?
And why don't we, right? This time in life seems so unknown, and yet it is absolutely knowable. Women live almost half of their lives in the peri and post-menopause years. And the more we learn, right, the more scientists realize that this is a critical window for preventative care. You can't start at 60 or 70. You've got to start earlier. So the mission of our longitudinal menopause project is to generate one of the most detailed examinations of brain health and menopause in the US to date. This is a multi-site study, and it unites our University of California campuses. And we're enrolling midlife women and following them extensively over time. You can see sort of the diversity of measures. If you are interested in joining the study, take a picture of that, or go to our website. You can join our participant registry. We are enrolling at sites up and down California, including UCSF, UC Santa Barbara, soon UC San Diego, and I hope soon UC Irvine. So why do a study of this magnitude, right? This is not an easy undertaking. It's a huge team effort. We're doing it because there's so much about the biology of menopause that we don't understand yet. And it's not because women are too complicated, right? It's not because menopause is like the Gordian knot of biology. It's a reflection of the fact that we have underinvested in a phenomenon that is going to affect half the global population. And California can lead the way. Right? Menopause is not just an endocrine transition, by the way. It's a neurological transition. It's a cardiovascular transition. It's a metabolic and immunological transition. And our study captures all of these elements so we can understand how they evolve over time. I think that gives you a taste of the science that's happening. I also want to, so while we're kind of in this headspace of menopause, our team also recognizes that in addition to data, we need to do some very serious policy work to improve menopause care for women here in California and at the federal level. I got to ask, how come in the year 2026, women don't have answers to fundamental questions about their body? And a lot of that starts with education, right? So according to a Johns Hopkins survey, only 20 to 30% of medical schools include menopause in their basic science curriculum. Yeah. And for those that do, it's mostly an elective. So if you need the bumper sticker, here it is. Women's bodies are not an elective, right? And And a module on menopause in grad school isn't enough. So I worked closely with Assemblymember Bauer-Kahan on a bill called AB 432. This was California's Menopause Care Equity Act, which sought to do two things, chiefly. Provide continuing medical education, CME credits on menopause for doctors if 25% of their patient base or more was women, because when you walk into a doctor's office, women are confronted with a medical system that was never designed to serve them. And we can at least raise the bar by just educating doctors. I'm not talking like extensive training, just like a basic module of what symptoms to look out for. And the onus cannot be on OB-GYNs because, again, neurologists, immunologists, endocrinologists should be aware because menopause can show up in different ways around the body. So that was one, big focus of this. And then the second one was to require insurance companies to actually cover medically necessary menopause care. It sounds so crazy when I say it out loud. It passed with overwhelming support. I went up there 2 times to testify. It was exhilarating. I loved being in the, State House. We got great energy and great questions. And it passed with overwhelming bipartisan support through the California Senate, through the House side. There's a but coming, right? No, there's a but coming. Newsom vetoed the bill in the 11th hour. Actually, on the last day, and it was during Menopause Awareness Month. Yeah, so, we can dig into the why behind that, but, if we can't get it done in California, you understand the power of the forces at play for everybody else in America. Okay, but that's the bad news. But despite the sting of the veto, we did eke out a small legislative victory. We worked with Bauer-Kahan's office and secured a $3 million investment from the state to create actually a comprehensive menopause clinic at every single UC campus with a medical school. So this is building on work from an extraordinary person at UCLA, Dr. Rajita Patil, who came up with, who directs UCLA's menopause clinic, one of the first in the nation to be a sort of one-stop shop providing comprehensive care. And so using that model and kind of cookie cuttering it around, we're now in the process of with the incredible support of the physicians at UC here, they are establishing these centers at medical centers, including right here at UC Irvine. So stay tuned. This is an extraordinary resource for members of the Irvine community. Okay. And Act 4, filling the gap. So, I think, you saw from the video that we are doing this work under the Anna Bowers Women's Brain Health Initiative. And I think, today is a celebration and it's a call to action, right? It is clear that we've got work to do, all of us. Right? We owe women a century of science, but we can't take another 100 years to get the job done. So the WBHI launched in 2023 with early foundational funding from Ann Bowers. We're an endowed research consortium. We have a administrative core at UC Santa Barbara with research that spans 9 institutions. And we're united in our mission to shine a floodlight on women's brain health. You can check out on our website all of the work that we have going on. I can barely scratch the surface here. I did mention 2 of our moonshot projects around the maternal brain and menopause. I'll mention in just the last few minutes, I'll tell you about one last flagship project. It's called the WBHI Brain Bank. Now, sort of the background to why we've created this entity. When so much about women's health is understudied, knowing where to shine a spotlight is a challenge, right? We don't know what we haven't studied. We don't know because the data is missing. So we have to get started. And so our mission is to build the most diverse and most comprehensive collection of data ever acquired for women's brain health. Our brain bank takes advantage of the single most important feature of the University of California, right? We are one university, actually, with 10 campuses spread out across a geographically and demographically diverse state. Right? We're the fourth largest economy in the world. We're home to 12% of the US population. And on their own, these universities rival other leading academic institutions. But combined, there is no other university system like it on the planet. Yeah. So the WBHI is dissolving these institutional silos and rewriting the rules of how science is done, right? This is radically collaborative. So we've built the pipelines to integrate MRI data collected across brain imaging centers at each of these institutions, and then we can pair that brain imaging data with neglected information on women's health. So this is a kind of classic consortium science model or approach. Harkens back to the model of genomics or particle physics, where massive amounts of data are collected through joint endeavors. Right? We know that embracing big data in those instances ushered in major discoveries for those fields. Think about the CERN, particle collider, and really kind of even collaboration happening across country borders. That's the kind of breakthrough science that happens when we work together, and we can do the same for women's health, right? We can study tens of thousands of women in ways that nobody else has, and with data that the UC can generate when and if we work together. It has been such a pleasure to build this, and just a huge shout out to Dr. Craig Stark, who's been kind of a PI on this brain bank project from the very beginning when it was just a little seed fund, and to our team, Lillian and Anne, who help with the boots on the ground operations here. We've had town halls here. You see Irvine, you can see Mike there, and just the team trying to kind of roll this out, and we've done this now across every UC that's part of this. If you've ever had a brain scan here in the Fiber Center, you might have seen this kind of signage just telling you like, hey, if you've had a brain scan, you can save a copy of it to the brain bank, and then you get a little questionnaire where you can kind of fill out that reproductive health history. And I just want to acknowledge the extraordinary work of Dr. Caitlin Taylor, who's Director of Operations for the WBHI, who's put so much work into building this. And we're doing it. We have almost, I think as of this week, we're up to 2,000 scans banked from, just an incredible group effort. And the data just keep rolling in. That's the best part. As I sort of, think about where we're going next, when you think about the status of women's health, it's easy to get angry. But there's actually so much to be hopeful about. We've got major gaps to fill, and any serious solution to that challenge means cultivating strategic partnerships with stakeholders across academia, government, business, media, and the WBHI is really serving as a springboard into these public-private partnerships. We have foundations like Fidelity, Welcome Leap, Pivotal Ventures that are stepping up to fill major gaps in research funding. We have leaders at Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, JP Morgan that are using their platforms to make a strong business case for investing in women's health. We have state legislatures that are considering bills to improve access to menopause care. It didn't work in California. They're having some success in Illinois. There's other states picking up the mantle. We have friends in the media like the ever lovely Halle Berry that lend their voice and their power to the cause to really drive change in extraordinary ways. So this is just, it's so deeply collaborative, so radically collaborative. And again, I think that's the only way to drive serious progress when we're starting so far behind the starting line. So when I think about where I'd like the WBHI to be in 5-10 years, if I'm being like totally audacious, I want the University of California to become the global epicenter for women's brain health. Right, with research and policy and training arms that bring the best minds to our collective campuses. And we've assembled the team to do it. Okay. In his writings, the American novelist Henry James encourages us to live our lives what he calls finely aware and ritually responsible. So if James is correct, we can fail in two ways, by being obtuse or negligent. I think everyone in this room lives up to the Jamesian ideal. Right? We're acutely aware of the challenge in front of us. And we have a profound sense of responsibility to do something about it. The WBHI, as I mentioned, this is a radically collaborative effort. It requires engineers and data scientists and MRI technologists and neurologists and women's health scholars and brain imaging center directors and an operations team working in concert. This is the opposite of siloed science. And the folks behind the WBHI, including the 90+ scientists contributing data, or the 800 of us who are part of a monthly seminar series, this beautiful virtual watering hole where we get to share ideas every month, or the 5,000 of us from 100 countries around the globe who participated in the world's first AI datathon for women's brain health. Together, we know that a global shift in science culture means a radically reimagining of how science is done. And these are the people to do it. So let's start a revolution in neuroscience tonight. Yeah. And let's start a revolution that ensures our scientific discoveries serve society. Not one half, not the fork crumb, the whole damn pie. So I want to just invite any of you who happen to be up the coast to come visit us in beautiful Santa Barbara. And more importantly, I want to acknowledge some of the amazing minds that contributed to some of the research data that I presented here tonight. It's the extraordinary work of some of the faces that you see here. I just get the privilege of being able to share it all with you all. And with that, I'm very delighted to take questions.